Second half of December 1941. When this video comes out, it is for many of us Christmas Eve in the strange holiday season of 2020, marked by restrictions on public life and for many hardships in private life, fear of disease and actual ill health, the untimely passing of near and dear ones, and economic hardships. Chances are that you aren't quite celebrating the holidays the way you are used to, but I hope that it could at least shine a little bit of hope and happiness into your life. Because you see, even if the suffering in the world of 1941 is even greater, that is what the holidays mean to at least some people then too. This is War Against Humanity, a sub-series of World War II in real time. I'm Spartacus Olsson. At the beginning of December 1941, as the war against humanity went global, we saw the result of 5 months of killing by one single Einsatzkommando tallied together in the Wieke report. Hitler made clear that the Nazi goal must now be the eradication of the world's Jews as soon as possible. Plans for that are made, and a meeting with all top Nazi bureaucrats is set for January 20th, 1942. And for that purpose, a mobile gas chamber at Chelmno started tests to gas massive amounts of people to death. And as the holiday season proceeds, so does the suffering. However, the vast majority of Americans are not yet touched by the war. And although the papers paint a picture of a strange, dark Christmas where the only gift people really want is peace on earth, for most, the fear is balanced by the familiarity of holiday trimmings, traditions, and family gatherings. In Washington, D.C., British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt celebrate Christmas together at the White House, briefly interrupting their first in-person conference as allies at war. Even many of the men and women they are leading into war far away from their families do what they can to mark the holidays. In the desert, Gilbert Wilson of the 10th Royal Hussars writes, Christmas Day 1941, the day of days. We celebrated it with bacon, sausages, and biscuits for breakfast, toasted the king and loved ones with Rita lime juice. For dinner, we had sausages, green peas, potatoes, and peaches and cream, homebush shortbread, and tea. The evening was made merry by a sing-song with the officers. I also listened on my tank wireless set to the old Mother Riley program and the news. The Royal Dragoons entered Benghazi. But while the Allied troops in North Africa have something to celebrate, there is little good news from East Asia, where the fighting is relentless through the Christmas days. As Hong Kong and many other places fall into the hands of the Japanese, a brutal wave of murder, torture, rape, and incarceration follows. In Western Europe, both behind the Nazi demarcations and in the few remaining unoccupied parts, families do what they can to give the children a semblance of normality. But the occupied parts are also plagued by an increasing suppression by the Nazi regime, with more and more dead or interned. In France, one of them is Agnès Humbert, an art historian imprisoned by the Nazis for distributing a clandestine newsletter critical of the Pétain regime and condemning Nazism. On December 25th, she writes in her diary, "The cold is simply excruciating. My warder, an Austrian veteran of the 1914-18 war and a former political prisoner himself, tries to show his sympathy for me. This morning he told me that it was Christmas Day, and that although like him I probably had children, I should not be too sad." As he spoke, he preferred me 2 detective stories, which he said I must promise to read in order to take my mind off things. At midday, the soldiers on guard duty launched into a Christmas carol. The adjutant barks at them to shut up. He's a perfect little Nazi, piously Heil Hitlering at the slightest opportunity. Clearly, in his view, it is positively obscene for his men to sing in celebration of the birth of a dirty Jew. And she isn't far off the mark, or as Nazi propagandist Friedrich Riem puts it in 1937, "We cannot accept that a German Christmas tree has anything to do with a crib and a manger in Bethlehem. It is inconceivable for us that Christmas and all its deep, soulful content is the product of an Oriental religion." So the Nazis have tried to remold Christmas back into its pre-Christian origins, renaming it Rauhnacht, a name of unclear origin for the 12 Nights of Christmas in some German regions. But in reality, it's more of a parody on Christmas that ensues. Some entrepreneurial merchants make a killing by bringing out jingoistic tree ornaments like Christmas grenades, replica guns and balls in Nazi style emblazoned with Sieg Heil, the SS runes, and even German Führer Adolf Hitler's likeness, which he, by the way, loathes and quickly prohibits. On December 18th, Hitler celebrates Christmas in Munich with a party of a large section of SS cadets. Here, flanked by an SS honor guard, Father Christmas gives the Führer, who's clearly been a good boy, presents. The cadets will soon join the other men on the Eastern Front, where Christmas is a hell of ice and fire, both on the Allied and Axis side. Panzerjäger Hans Roth is one of them. On Christmas Day, he is again at battle. We hear the tanks rattling closer, and we know that there will be no rest for many hours. As so often has been the case within the last few days, the hard fight begins, man against man, with their own weapons becoming a dangerous liability, because their hands freeze to them if they touch the metal with bare fingers. But perhaps that is only the entrance to hell, because behind these fighting Germans, the Holocaust by bullets has now taken the lives of over 6,500 men, women, and children every day for 5 months. That's a family of 4, the mother, the father, and 2 children murdered every minute, 24 hours a day for 152 days, tallying up to over 1 million murdered when the year ends. And as that year ends, the carnage goes on, growing the long list of places in the Baltic states, Belarus, Poland, Croatia, Ukraine, Romania, and Russia, where the Nazis and their allies have murdered Jews. From December 15th to 17th, 2,731 Jews are killed in the Latvian coastal town of Liepāja. In Ukraine, many Jews in Crimea fall victim to the increasing pressure by the Germans, where on December 30th, 443 are shot on the side of a road near Simferopol. But the biggest massacre in the last days of the year takes place in the Romanian-occupied territory of Transnistria, now a de facto prisoner state of ghettos and camps, where Jews live in tightly packed camps under conditions unworthy of anything alive. In November, we saw how up to 56,000 Jews were crammed into the Bogdanovka concentration camp. Typhus has broken out there and is now quickly spreading, killing hundreds. For the German Nazis and Romanian fascists, the conditions they have forced these people into becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, confirming anti-Semitic ideas about Jews as bearers of disease. The Germans advised the Romanian district leader, Colonel Modest Isupescu, to simply kill all the Jews in the camp. He agrees, and they create a murder task force made up of Romanian gendarmerie and military troops, over 60 ethnic German policemen under the command of the SS, Ukrainian police, and civilian volunteers from the nearby town of Golta. The operation begins December 21st. They start by locking up 5,000 that have been diagnosed with typhus in 2 large stables of the pig farm that the camp is based on. Then they drench the stables in kerosene and set them ablaze. The remaining Jews are taken in groups of 300 to 400 to a nearby forest. But it's December and it's freezing cold. The already weakened victims often collapse and freeze to death before they even reach the forest. The ones that make it are faced with the scene that I have described over and over again in the last months. Men, women, and children are forced to undress, walk naked to line up at the edge of a valley edging on a waterbed, where they are shot in the nape of their necks. From time to time, the murderers alternate their method by throwing grenades into the groups of naked people. In 3 days, at least 30,000 are killed. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, the perpetrators take a break to celebrate Christmas. They return on the 27th and kill at least 11,000 more until New Year's Eve. It's hard to imagine what these men were thinking. It gets easier when you know that they were not only inebriated by hate, but literally drunk and high on drugs. What went on in the minds of the victims is impossible to imagine. First-hand accounts are rare, as almost none lived to write down their final feelings and experiences. We have some, like an account of the October 12th massacre in Stanislav. It is the entry of March 13th and March 18th, 1942, in the diary of Elsa Binda, a teenager from Stanislav who will be murdered at the hands of the Nazis in 1943. The entry is not written by Elsa herself, but an unnamed young woman a few years older who somehow managed to escape the massacre and then meets Elsa in the ghetto. I am currently 22 years old. This ought to be the time of the most beautiful days of my life. When I ponder my life today, I see how joyless it has been, full of sad experiences and trials. Today, I live in constant fear of losing my life. When we get up in the morning, we do not know whether we will lie down in our own beds at night, and when we go to bed at night, we do not know whether we will peacefully and safely live to see the next day. On that famous Sunday of October 12, 1941, I was at the cemetery together with my sister Bronka. I stayed calm to the end. I could not come to terms with the thought of my impending death. I did everything I could to save myself. Death reigned all around me. In front of me is an open grave, and hundreds of people fall into the grave at the shot of a revolver. Behind me, people are clustered, beaten into a cramped mass, bloodied, beaten, suffocating in horrible agony. Next to me lie several people who wanted to feign death. They were in fact killed when a Ukrainian policeman, beating and mocking them, stands on their stomachs and stomps with his boots until their insides come out. But I had grown hardened. I did not cry and I did not lose my head. I blushed heavily as my coat and sweater were removed. I moved smoothly and lightly, continually making my way to the back. Hoping to gain some time, I begged the Germans to spare our lives and asked that they rather take us to some labor camps so we could live. My young life up to that point, without sun, without happiness, flashed before my eyes, and a powerless anger towards the injustice of life arose within me. Now, when I find myself in the full bloom of youth, which occurs only briefly and once in everyone's life, I am to die, having experienced nothing good? Why? Did I commit some sin by being born to a Jewish mother? Did I cause someone irreparable harm? Why is a human being who is equal to me, whom I'm seeing for the very first time, my mortal enemy, and why does he have the right to deprive hundreds of thousands of innocent people of their lives? Those who believe in God and expect mercy or a response from Him are naive. Unfortunately, I see the culture and barbarism of the 20th century which reveals itself precisely in such deeds. Every article in the newspaper, every poster in the city contains a vow to exterminate the Jews. We've been shut inside the ghetto like lepers without any prospect of making a living. The only way to survive here is by selling clothes. Our powers are at their end. Our bodies are exhausted and malnourished. We constantly delude ourselves with the hope that change will come, a hope that keeps us alive. But how long can one live on spiritual strength alone, which is already starting to weaken? This is a horrible feeling. You feel that the noose is already around your neck and you are surrounded by guards, so you cannot escape. But on the other hand, you are aware that you could still live, that you are healthy, strong, but deprived of all the rights of a human being. More than once, when I have felt bad, I have wished for death. I do not know whether I am sinning by uttering such a wish, but I feel that I should and must come to terms with this thought. We don't know what happened to her. It's unlikely that she survived the Holocaust, but when she writes this, the Holocaust by bullets is over. It is, however, not mercy or remorse that stops the murdering. It is the weather and the lack of new victims. Without heavy machinery, it's no longer possible to dig burial pits in the frozen ground. The German advance has now been halted, even routed in some places. New cities and their Jewish communities are no longer falling into Nazi hands. As 1941 turns into 1942, new plans that no longer need pits, that no longer just account for newly occupied territory in the East, are in the works. In 1942, the killers will not go after their victims, but force them to make a one-way trip to Chelmno, Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, Majdanek, or Auschwitz-Birkenau. As this new chapter in the war against humanity is about to begin, I'd like to thank all of you who have watched this far, despite how difficult it is to face this horror, this sadness. I'd like to thank my loving wife and producer Astrid for facing this task together with me, my very good friend Indy for fighting alongside of me, Joram for helping me research and write these episodes, Mickey and Karolina for spending countless hours submerged in these pictures and films while editing, and the entire rest of the Time Ghost team for working diligently to keep these memories alive. Last but not least, I'd like to thank the members of the Time Ghost Army that make it possible for us to do all of this in the first place. You can join them at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. Never forget.